Um, Pūlama and I is here. Rachel will be doing a presentation and then we'll open it up for public discussion and then ESRC discussion. And then I'm going to turn it over to staff right now for some announcements before we go forward with the agenda item.
We just have a few announcements. First, we want to welcome Jason Omick as the new DOFA Wildlife Program Manager, and we'll be working really closely with Jason, the HCP team will. So welcome, Jason.
Hello, everyone.
We're really excited to have Jason as he has worked on HCPs in the past and a lot of different programs and has a great deal of experience. So we're looking forward to having him. Another announcement is we will be going to the site visit, the public site visit, ESRC site visit at Pūlama Lānaʻi's conservation area on January 17th. So that site visit will be at 11 a.m. start, and we will be sunshining that visit so that the public is also made aware. So keep on the lookout on our website for information regarding that and more details to come. And also, just as an FYI to our ESRC members, we will be sending out a poll soon for a follow-up meeting after this ESRC meeting, most likely in February. And that will be to address the comments that you all have today, as well as at the ESRC site visit regarding the SHA. And so we will be sending a poll shortly, and then we'll also be potentially looking like February for our annual review for the fiscal year 2024. So we'll also be sending a poll to ESRC members for that annual review meeting for all the wind farms and even the non-wind HCPs, other than the KSHCP, which will be a separate meeting that will be after that first annual review. So stay tuned for that.
Okay, thanks for that. I don't have a calendar event for January 17th, so could somebody on staff end please get out a calendar event so that's held in our calendars? And then, sorry if I'm a little bit unclear, but is there anything else that's actually in the calendar besides the 17th? Any like monthly meetings or anything?
On the 17th. I wish I just had to go.
And then if you could mute your mic, please. Sorry, Kavika. So the 17th is not a virtual meeting. It's actually the in-person site visit on the night.
Right, I understand, but can we still get a calendar event?
Absolutely, yeah.
Please?
Yeah, we can do that, yeah.
And are there any other things that are actually in the calendar but not in the calendar? Or is
Nope.
everything else a poll at this point?
Yep, that's all.
Okay. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Kinsley.
Thanks, Kinsley. Any other questions for Kinsley before we move on? All right, seeing none, so we'll go ahead and move to item 2, which is the request for comments and review of the draft safe harbor agreement for introduction of the endangered Orangeblack Hawaiian Damselfly to a conservation area on the island of Lānaʻi between Lāna'i Resorts LLC, Pūlama Lānaʻi, U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, and the State of Hawaii Department of Land and Natural Resources. So I'm gonna go ahead and turn it over to Rachel, who will be presenting an overview of this agreement.
Thank you, Afshin. Can everyone hear me okay? Yep, okay, good. Oh, here we go. Sorry, I'm
Oh, yeah, here we go.
Sorry, I'm looking at 3 screens and I'm also, my computer is the host of the meeting, so okay, I'm just making sure it's in the right place. And okay, perfect. Thank you all. My name is Rachel Sprague. I am a director of conservation for Lāna'i Resorts LLC, doing business as Pūlama Lāna'i. I want to acknowledge my co-director of conservation, John Sprague, who is on Zoom. Our council, our internal and external counsel, Sarah Simmons and Lisa Bale, are on the call as well. And I want to thank you, the ESRC members, for taking the time today to talk with us about a conservation project we've been working on with, and I also want to thank our colleagues at the state at DLNR and at the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service for working with us on this for the last couple of years, actually. So this is a brief overview of what I'm going to talk about today. You have the document, but I want to hit some of the sort of high level points and things that I think are important, and hopefully share a little bit of thought and clarification on it, and then obviously answer any questions you may have. So by way of introduction, this is a safe harbor, a request for a safe harbor agreement at the state level and a conservation benefit agreement at the federal level. They changed the regulations and the name of it. So this is a voluntary action by the landowner. So this is something we are coming to you with. This is to benefit listed species, and as part of that, having an agreement to include assurances for potential incidental take for the landowner. And the whole point of this is to provide a net benefit to Orangeblack Hawaiian Damselflies, which are the Megalagrion, xanthomelas, as well as other covered species over a proposed 50-year agreement. And I also just want to emphasize that this is a collaborative partnership project between the landowner, Pūlama Lāna'i, and DLNR and the Fish and Wildlife Service. This started in conversations between us and the invertebrate program at DOFA, who we work with on a variety of other things. And so this is really, again, the project is really a collaboration. And on our part, sort of why we are interested in this to start with, the mission of our company, and as Pūlama Lāna'i, is to build a sustainable future for that island, for the island of Lāna'i, and that does include stewardship of the land, of species, and of biocultural diversity that is on the land. And so John and I think about that every day in terms of trying to go out and make the island a little bit better place, and to think about the species that rely on us to care for them. Just our department that John and I manage kind of ranges between 12 or 15 people and 25 to 30 people, depending on the year and depending on what's going on. But what we go out and do every day is thinking about native species and habitat protection and monitoring, invasive species removal and control, and biosecurity, and so preventing new introductions to the island. And so this is what our team is working on, between wildlife and habitat work and biosecurity on a daily basis. And a lot of this does include threatened and endangered species already. We have an 80-acre predator exclusion fence around a large portion of native forest with Hawaiian petrels, with ua'u, as well as kahuli tree snails, and a variety of endangered plants in there. We have 2 what we like to call pa kahuli instead of snail jails. It's a little more protective of the snails and less of a punitive thing. But we have 2 pa kahuli for 2 federally listed endemic species of Lāna'i tree snails, as well as doing large scale. Those are all rodent traps across Lāna'i Hale, protecting native species, and doing rare plant and other plant conservation work. And this is just to emphasize that we've made a number of long-term commitments to conservation as well as our day-to-day work. Some of these are formalized. For instance, we have an MOU with the Fish and Wildlife Service that was signed in 2016. We are operating under somewhere in the realm upwards of 10 federal and state permits for endangered species recovery, salvage, depredation of invasive species, rehabilitation, and other work. And we are engaged in a long-term partnership with NIFWF that's focusing on larger landscape level conservation on Lānaʻi's windward side. And so this is all just to say that this agreement would be a continuation of our mission and ongoing work. So just to touch on Orangeblack Damselflies for those of you who don't get to spend time with them every day, and I don't either yet. So Megalagrion xanthomelas is endemic to all Hawaiian Islands except for Kaho'olawe. It has been extirpated, or it is assumed to be. It is no longer found on Hawai'i and Lāna'i. Current situation is that it's limited to 34 known populations. I guess Will or Janice, please correct me later if this is not correct. But potentially just one population remaining on Oahu, 3 on Maui, 7 on Molokai, and 23 on Hawaii Island. The species, and the recovery plan does call for populations on the other islands, including Lāna'i. The species does, obviously face range-wide threats, similar to a lot of other species in Hawaii, where they've faced challenges with habitat quality and availability. We've already lost 12% of lowlands to upper elevation wetlands, as well as most anchoring pools, and we've lost a lot of intact stream habitat in Hawaii. They are affected by channelization, dewatering, diversion of streams, as well as flash flooding, and other issues like agriculture and urban development, and impacts of feral ungulates and invasive plants that affect their stream habitat. And they also face issues with predation by non-native species, in particular fish, the mosquito fish, the gambusia, and other similar species that are often introduced to control mosquitoes, as well as some sort of microscopic back swimmers and hydra that are causing problems in some of their existing populations. The species itself is relatively a resilient one, which is sort of interesting of why they're so constricted. They are pretty hardy when it comes to their habitats that they can persist in the absence of predators in particular. They're a relatively low elevation species. They're most abundant at 0 to 200 feet elevation, up to 2,000 feet. One of the last locations they were seen on Lāna'i was one of their highest known elevations that they were found at, which was in some old golf course ponds up around 1,600 feet elevation in Lāna'i City. They like pools with standing water for a couple months for naiad development, as well as a wide range of habitats for streams, wetlands, and anchoring pools. And they have pretty broad physiological tolerances to abiotic water conditions. So what we're here to talk about today is this is really the meat of it. This is a conservation area that we've been talking about in partnership with Will and Cynthia and Janice at DLNR, of creating artificial habitat that could be managed for this species. And so it's in its simplest form, it is a fence. So ungulates are everywhere, and so this would be an ungulate fence. Constructing artificial habitat pools in fenced areas. Both the current captive rearing and other folks who have worked on damselflies say that they have had a lot of success with artificial pools that can be managed closely. There would be introduction of the damselflies that would be done by DOFA, that would not be done by us. We would be managing the conservation site going forward, so restoration, outplanting, vegetation, weed management, and predator control. Predator control is going to, you might say why, that will come up in a second. So this is the area that is being looked at, just to orient you to Lāna'i, the inset map. This is an area that's just off the road, just a couple miles south of Lāna'i City. It is an area that currently does not have any wetland features or surface water. It is within the historical elevational range of Orangeblack Hawaiian Damselflies, and it's an area that has, it's in the current water service, as well as accessible for management and monitoring. For those of you who will be able to come to the site visit, we can walk around the area, but this is what you will see. It is currently a relatively blank slate situation when it comes to native species restoration. It is nearly 100% dominated by Formosan koa. The sprinkling of other species, you get beautiful things such as strawberry guava and lantana in there. So we have done a number of surveys through there. I don't think I've seen a native plant in there, even common species currently. This is old agricultural land, so this was land that was impacted by the pineapple plantation for probably about 80 years when Dole Pineapple was operating. What we expect to see from this project in that conservation area would be at least a small pond of new damselfly breeding habitat, up to 3 acres of protected fenced ungulate-free area around that pond or ponds, hopefully supporting a new population of Orangeblack Hawaiian Damselflies with predator-controlled habitat that would also likely contain surface water that may benefit Hawaiian stilts and Hawaiian coots. They will tend to show up to anywhere where there is surface water, and they do exist on Lānaʻi. Also, potentially the terrestrial area around the ponds may provide forage cover and potential nesting resources for Simulon's yellow-faced bees. They've been seen a couple miles away in an area where there was habitat restoration that had outplanted and protected some just Ilima and Ko'oloa ula, Abilalon menzizii. So we know that they may come in this area if there are native plants that that start to do well. And then overall, increased range or an increased population or a new population for Orangeblack Hawaiian damselfly would provide some resilience for a species that's facing threats across much of its range. And overall, generally abating ecological damage from ungulates and invasive species in that area. So even though the conservation measures are really focused around benefits to damselflies, because there are potential benefits as well as possible challenges with other endangered species, the covered species under the agreement do include Hawaiian coot, Hawaiian stilt, and yellow-faced bees. That's where some of the actions such as predator control of cats and rats comes in, that we don't want to make a place that is potentially beneficial for Hawaiian coots and stilts, but have them to a place that is not protected from predators. So I would call your attention to the right-hand side, where currently we know that there are Hawaiian coot, Hawaiian stilt, and Simulon's yellow-faced bees on Lānaʻi. They are not present at the conservation area. There is no appropriate habitat for them. They've never been seen there. Orangeblack Hawaiian damselfly are a covered species. They are also not at the currently at the conservation area, and they're presumed extirpated from the island. So part of a safe harbor agreement and doing beneficial things for that, for the target covered species, do potentially include impacts to them in other areas. And so this is where the other areas of the enrolled property come in. This map on the right is showing the proposed enrolled property, and I would note that the enrolled property is that light shaded lavender gray, which is all of the properties owned by Lanai Resorts LLC, doing business as Pūlama Lāna'i. I also want to point out that all of that area does not contain surface water or habitat that is even appropriate or attractive for damselflies at all. So that area, those TMKs are considered enrolled property for the sole purpose of covering incidental take of damselflies. They're you hopefully have saw this part in the agreement, but there's no incidental take coverage requested for covered species outside of the conservation area. And in that enrolled property, in those other areas, there's really a wide variety of land uses, including habitat, conservation lands, commercial resort properties, residential homes and businesses, and industrial uses. There does contain some standing or flowing water, but we don't expect damselflies to expand into most other areas because most of that standing or flowing water is currently in use as commercial or industrial features. And so I'm going to talk about that just a little bit more so you can have a picture of what some of that looks like. So given that the Orangeblack Hawaiian damselflies need predatory fish-free water that is not chemically treated, most of these other areas the biologists from DLNR, I think, and the Fish and Wildlife Service would agree that they're not generally appropriate for damselflies, and we don't expect damselflies to establish there, but it's possible that damselflies could visit those areas. And so the agreement would provide coverage for incidental take as an assurance for the landowner. So what the agreement is covering is not just every single square inch of land for anything. It's covering current and future activities that could reasonably involve incidental take of damselflies. So this includes these water features such as wastewater storage and treatment and storage facilities, water features at resorts and parkland, sort of water and stormwater management with swales that don't generally hold water but could for short periods of time, and the municipal water utility distribution system, which Pūlama Lānaʻi owns. So some of the characteristics of these properties are that they generally are significant distances away from the conservation area. They may be things like stormwater or overflow ditches that are meant to move water to sewers, not retain water. Reservoirs or ponds with populations of non-native fish that are predators to damselfly naiads. Active or open sewage treatment ponds, and other ponds that are treated with aquatic biocides. The types of activities that go on in there is kind of what you would expect from their names. Things like water feature maintenance or removal. This was an old golf course pond on the lower right that was redone, ripped out. This was just a year or two ago, turned into a water park, sort of adventure park for the Four Seasons. But that's a constructed pond, but it is made to look somewhat natural for the overall aesthetics of it, as well as things like the upper part is water hyacinth being removed from a sewage treatment area. So just to show you some of these again, the shaded area is the overall enrolled property. We've highlighted some of the areas where these current features exist. So the conservation area for reference is in red outlined, and this in purple is the closest facility to it that has water. This is the auxiliary reclamation facility. So this takes water from the county's wastewater treatment plant and it puts it into ponds that have fish and are treated further so that it can be turned into R1 and then used for irrigation and other such things. This area outlined in yellow is the Sensei Lānaʻi Four Seasons Resort and the former Experience at Ko'ele golf course that is no longer a golf course, no longer has water in the ponds. This is what the ponds look like. They are concrete lined and are generally treated with chlorine or other biocides to prevent larval development of mosquitoes, which does impact other invertebrates. So we don't really see too much going on up in those ponds, though we have surveyed for damselflies, either non-native or non-listed ones. Down by the south end of the island, by the Four Seasons Resort near Hulapoi and Manele Bays, there are additional water features. Again, they're associated with the resort, and there's a small wastewater treatment facility that has an evaporating pond for R1 water as well. So this is wanting to just go over briefly the minimization and avoidance and anticipated effects and take and monitoring and adaptive management. In all of the conservation measures, as well as the other covered activities that would be covered in those other commercial and industrial areas, all of those have fairly extensive minimization and avoidance described in the document. I'm happy to talk about it, but I don't want to go through all of it. But we've worked pretty extensively on this with the Fish and Wildlife folks and DLNR team. And so these minimization and avoidance, they include a lot of things that you would hopefully expect, including things like constructing the fence and conservation ponds prior to damselfly introduction. And so you wouldn't expect any covered species presence there. We would be doing surveys, I think, are really one of the key pieces to determine if damselflies are even present at the conservation area, if they do well, or if they were to make it to other areas, as well as doing those surveys to ensure that if there are other covered species in the areas in the conservation area where we would be doing work. The minimization and avoidance measures include things like an activity buffer. If Hawaiian stilts or coots were observed in the conservation area, or things like doing consultation with the DLNR or the service if damselflies were found in other areas, like in a wastewater treatment pond prior to work, and has measures for consultation and then potential evacuation or relocation of those individuals if it were feasible prior to work commencing. And other sort of detailed measures in the conservation area, such as if there's habitat work being done or maintenance being done around those ponds that are the artificial habitat ponds, making sure that things like the plants that are removed near the water line are going into covered containment on the site to allow any damselfly eggs present to hatch while preventing new eggs to be laid. And again, this is just a summary examples of some of the minimization avoidance, but there are substantial sections in the agreement that I'm happy to talk about if you have any questions. So overall, even with those minimization and avoidance measures, there is still limited potential for take of covered species due to, first, the conservation and management activities in the conservation area. For instance, the transfer of plant vegetation or pond maintenance or sediment removal and draining refilling could impact damselflies that are in that conservation area. Weed removal could affect damselflies. It could also affect yellow-faced bees or Hawaiian coots or stilts. Predator control, if you're doing it around the covered species you're protecting, always has the potential to impact, even though those impacts generally are very, very low. And there's the potential for incidental take of damselflies in those other commercial and industrial areas during the course of actions like commercial water feature maintenance or water utility management activities. And for damselflies and yellow-faced bees, it is really difficult to monitor incidental take of individuals. So in working with the DOFA team and the service team, what is in the document is proposing to use the sort of reporting standards and that are used in other situations with other invertebrates, which is to have the reporting based on management activities of how many ponds are drained, how much habitat is being managed. And so this is a summary of the anticipated incidental take that is being requested under this agreement. So for Orangeblack Hawaiian Damselfly in the conservation area, obviously there's the minimization and avoidance measures that would always be happening, but then it would be reporting out on the take of essentially assuming all individuals of all life stages associated with ponds that are affected by a given action. For instance, if it were being drained to do maintenance and then refilled. In other areas, again, the dispersal to those other areas is unpredictable but possible, and so the estimated take there is again consistent with the agency's approach to some other invertebrates, is that it would be all individuals of all life stages resulting from the covered activities reported as areas where damselflies were seen prior to those activities. For yellow-faced bees, Hawaiian stilts, and Hawaiian coots, there's the potential that over the lifetime of the agreement that there could be incidental take in the conservation area as a result of those habitat restoration and management activities. For yellow-faced bees, it would be reported as all life stages reported by activity. And for Hawaiian stilts and coots, over the 50-year term of the agreement, it's 3 individuals of each as the potential estimated take. And those species may find safe habitat in the conservation area, but are not expected. That conservation area is so small and it's so damselfly focused that it's not expected to contribute to increased dispersal of those covered species to other areas of the enrolled property, like to other areas of the island more than they are already. So no take is expected in other areas from the covered activities for those species. So incidental take will continue to be avoided. There's a fair amount of monitoring that is associated with all of these projects, including in the conservation area, monitoring for damselflies and stilts and coots. pretty heavily for the first year and then quarterly so long as damselflies are present, making sure that we're inspecting the water quality and water levels and water temperature, that sort of thing in the ponds, as well as doing timed counts for assimilons, yellow-faced bees once there are native plants in there. And in other areas, those commercial and industrial facilities, making sure that there is pre-maintenance and management monitoring, and then adaptive management, which there is, again, it's kind of a big table, so I didn't include it here, but I do have it as a later slide if folks want to talk about it. But just to
Sorry,
close
is it
out,
a table given in one of the attachments? If you could point us to the page, that would be helpful.
sure, I can pull it up, but not while I'm presenting. So if I can also speak, I have
we all have been given materials, so I'm just asking if this table you're referring to is in the materials that we've been given, and if so, if you could point us to the page.
It is. We'll need to look up the page. It's in the conservation benefit safe harbor draft agreement, and I can't remember what section it is, but it's a little ways down. Hopefully someone can drop it in the chat, or I can do that right after the next slide. Oh, there's nothing in the chat. Sorry about that. We will look it up, and I will talk about the last thing, which was the net conservation benefits. So again, all of this work is intended to benefit Orangeblack Hawaiian Damselfly on Lānaʻi again. It's a place where we hope that we can see damselflies in a protected ungulate-free area. This is almost a proof of concept that this is a species that's facing declines across so much of its range and so many challenges to its habitat, that if in partnership with DLNR, and if we can show that that a population can be successful in artificially created habitat, it could really benefit the species, as well as providing a particular benefit for in the form of a new population of damselflies, with preservation of genetic diversity in a new area, as well as providing benefits for Hawaiian silts and Hawaiian coots, foraging cover and nesting resources for bees, generally increased resilience for the species, and increased collaborative recovery efforts and opportunities for public education and outreach. So I will say thank you. These are from some of the current endangered species on Lānaʻi, and hopefully at some point Orangeblack Hawaiian Damselfly will be able to join them. So I'm happy to take questions, and I do have a table of the adaptive management, like 2 slides down, if you would like to look at that first, Kavika.
It's page 34.
On page 34 of the draft conservation agreement as well.
So before we go to ESRC discussion, let's go to the public first. So I'm going to ask staff if there's any comments, questions that are on YouTube or email or Zoom that has come in, or Zoom. If there's anyone from public on Zoom, they can speak up.
Afshin, I would say we had YouTube technical difficulties, so I apologize if anyone's colleagues are trying to join on YouTube. I would recommend signing into the Zoom link, as we are not unable to live stream it on YouTube right now. But currently there are no email questions, but like Afshin mentioned, if anyone on Zoom has any questions, or we can also give a little bit more time for people to join via Zoom if they are in the public and they have questions.
Okay, thanks, Kinsley. So I guess, yeah, we can come back to see if there's any more public comments, just in case people get late getting on the Zoom. So yeah, I'll go ahead and open it up if there are no public comments. So ESRC discussion, questions, comments, anything.
Okay. So I would like to go through the table in a little bit more detail. So if you could do that on the slide, but before we go there, I'm a little bit unclear about why we're doing safe harbor if they don't exist on Lānaʻi. Are you reintroducing them, or are you doing this just in case they spontaneously generate or fly over?
Oh, no, apologies. The agreement is to create a conservation area And DLNR would then introduce the species to that area.
Okay.
It's not,
Have there been thoughts about genetic diversity of which populations were going to be reintroduced, and if somebody could walk through the genetic considerations quickly?
I can say from the landowner's perspective, the agreement calls for the Megalagrion working group taking the lead on making that decision. We are interested in being involved in supporting. It's largely going to fall to the agencies to determine that. I think the closest historic population is thought to be Molokai. From a biologist standpoint, I'm always interested in supporting the resilience of the species. So we would defer to the agencies on if there were other genetic stocks that were in greater peril and needed that resilience.
Okay.
And so
yeah. Thanks. That was more of a question for the agencies than it was for the applicant. So just curious if anybody has thought that through.
Yeah, we do have our invertebrate folks on the meeting, so maybe one of them.
Be nice to hear from them. Thank you.
Yeah, can you hear me okay? Yeah. Yeah, so my name's Will Haynes. I'm with the Hawaii Invertebrate Program with DOFA. So yeah, that is something we've taken into consideration. And as Rachel said, you know, it will go before the Megalagrion Working Group, which is an interagency group. But the genetic work that has been done, you know, when we did have Lāna'i populations, the Lāna'i populations shared haplotypes with both Molokai and Oahu. So those are the two islands that we'd be focusing on for source material for Lāna'i.
Okay, thank you. And then, since you have the mic, I just ask another related question for you. Is the other damselflies competitors or predators or dragonfly predators, and is there a plan for them in this safe harbor agreement?
Other species of damselflies and dragonflies, like non-native species. Yeah, so we have discussed with Pūlama Lāna'i about possibly using some like covering the ponds with mesh to prevent primarily dragonflies because they're larger. There's ways we could prevent them from ovipositing in the ponds to sort of give the orange-black damselflies a leg up. We talked about doing that in, you know, some of the ponds, but perhaps not the whole conservation area. But that is something.
Are there dragonflies on Lāna'i?
Yes, yeah, they're pretty widespread. Okay. You know, we have both native and non-native dragonflies that can be predators. You know, they're going to get eaten by other things, no matter what. That, you know, that's just part of ecology. But there are ways that we can try to push the balance in their favor. They do coexist with these non-native dragonflies at other natural sites, so it's not thought that it will be a major limiting factor. But in the initial stages of reintroducing them, it's something that we could do to help them get established.
Okay, thanks, Will. And then for the applicant, Rachel, is there a page you could point us to in the safe harbor where it talks about how you folks would deal with predation from other insects?
I'm trying to remember where. So I think there's in Appendix A, there is. Yeah, there's discussion in Appendix A about in construction of the ponds to keep, honestly, to keep a fence locked so that people don't dump mosquito fish into the ponds. And in our discussions with Will, I think there's not a lot of discussion of other insect predation because the thought was that that was relatively natural, other than the potential for covering again 1 or 2 of the initial release ponds to keep dragonflies out. And that is.
Yeah, I mean, you could argue that cat predation on Oahu is also natural, but if dragonflies aren't native, then they're an invasive predator of endangered species, and they should be considered in my mind.
I'm pulling up the agreement while we're talking to find the page where the dragonflies are discussed. I think other than protecting a pond with mesh to prevent dragonflies from ovipositing, I'm not aware of any other actions that are possible in any of their existing populations to prevent dragonflies from predating them, but this is something I would defer to Will on.
Sorry to interrupt right quick. On page 6 of 8 in Appendix A, it talks about mitigation and avoidance measures during damselfly introduction, which includes a bit about the netting across the introduction ponds. I think that if damselflies were seen to be more of a threat beyond those initial reintroductions, we would include netting over those areas accordingly. So at least on my copy, Appendix A, page 6 of 8.
Thank you. I'll take a look at. I'm sorry, I'm not sure if Will was going to make a comment, but I was just curious. So is there anything in the mitigation about, if this happens and we're going to net, and is there any kind of predator control of dragonflies that could be employed if you have to net a pond? Or have you folks thought that through at all?
There's not a whole lot that you could do to control dragonflies without affecting, negatively affecting the native damselflies, once they're in there. Prior to the introduction, or even, after introduction, it is possible to manually remove damselfly naiads if those are seen to, be, but you can physically find them and, just net them. I don't think we included that as an action in the conservation benefit agreement. Yeah, because I don't think it's something that you could sustainably do, over the course of the entire agreement. My thought is that, these non-native dragonflies and damselflies, although they are competitors with our native species, they are not at other sites, at natural sites. They don't exclude establishment or prevent establishment of orange-black damselflies. So they're not thought to be sort of a deal breaker in the same way that invasive fish are, never seen to co-occur with the orange-blacks.
Okay. Yeah, thanks for clarifying those. So I was assuming that they were major because they are no longer on Kauai and another island. So what was the reason for their extirpation on those islands? I'm just trying to make sure learning from history, right? And in this one?
Yeah, primarily non-native fish. So mosquito fish were widely introduced. And when we did surveys on Lāna'i and revisited some of the historical locations, all of those locations had mosquito fish present currently. And so the idea here is to create habitat that is sort of distant from any sources of mosquito fish, and where it's unlikely that mosquito fish would get into the ponds, so that we could bring it back to Lāna'i. Because right now it's very difficult to remove mosquito fish from natural waterways once they're there.
Okay, so there's just some things that aren't lining up in my mind because, as I think some folks on this call know, I was the director of Limahuli Garden Preserve for 13 years, and there are only mosquito fish in the lower reaches of the stream. There's no mosquito fish in the upper reaches, not in the lo'is. And if there are indeed no damselflies and that wasn't the cause of their extirpation, it would have to be another factor. And I'm assuming that would be the other damselflies and dragonflies.
I
Which would
I
make
read
me
in the
think-
document, is it correct that apple snails are also predators?
You know, we don't have apple snails either in Limahuli.
Hmm.
So I'm just saying that seems like there's something that we're not understanding, and like an example of, I mean, that whole area, Napali and everything, if there's no damselflies there and there's no mosquito fish, then there's another factor in the species extirpation from Kauai. And if the only other thing I can think of are the non-native damselflies and dragonfly, and maybe they have a larger impact than our current scientific knowledge is aware of. Maybe we should think a little bit more about that.
Okay, so to clarify, there are about 25 different species of endemic damselflies. This is just one of them, and there is a very high diversity of endemic damselflies on Kauai. This species is more of a lowland species typically. It likes kind of slow-moving ponds, or sorry, slow-moving streams or ponds. A lot of its populations are in coastal like ankyline pools. But it does occur also in, you know, just marshland, and that, or historically would occur in like low elevation wetlands. So yeah, there are plenty of endemic damselfly species on Kauai still, but this species has been extirpated. And in fact, it was extirpated quite a long time ago. So there are only a few specimens known from Kauai, and we're not really sure why it was extirpated there. It may have only had, you know, very small populations there to begin with.
Okay. So I guess question for the applicant, in the mitigation plans, when you would cover a pond with shade cloth or something, how big are these ponds that would be covered?
So in our discussions with Will and Cynthia, the suggestion was to potentially only cover one or two small of essentially like the release bins. They might be just a couple feet across, to cover those with like 2-inch by 2-inch opening elk mesh, so that the orange-black Hawaiian damselflies can get through, because they like to kind of fly and perch and then fly through, as opposed to dragonflies that sort of zoom a little bit more, but to not try to interfere with the larger pond that's likely going to be in the, you know, sort of 10 feet by 12 feet kind of range.
Okay, thanks. I'm thinking about this.
Yeah, thank you.
Pass it on though.
I was gonna ask some questions. So in looking at this project, I commend some invertebrate conservation happening, which is great. I think, you know, kind of first that came to mind is also the thinking about bats and whether bats would be attracted to this area and what the current kind of distribution on bats is on Lānaʻi. And then it also took me to thinking about, and I recognize at the beginning of the presentation, you talked about all the different agreements that are and permits that are with Fish and Wildlife Service and the state. But this seems very ripe for actually a much larger safe harbor agreement, much like the Kamehameha Schools one potentially. So I know that would be another huge amount of work, but it was just interesting that it's these specific species. And I think there's a lot of potential for, you know, a lot of recognition and safe harbor for other species also on Lānaʻi that are endangered.
Yeah, thank you. I I don't know if anyone else wants to take the bats. Bats did come up. They were detected on Lānaʻi, I think during some surveys for the Maui Police Department tower. There's not been any others seen as far as I know. That obviously doesn't mean they're not there. I think it was determined that this area would not hold any likelihood for incidental take that would be beyond any other ungulate fence that was anywhere else around a county wastewater plant or the state, you know, or any other habitat where bats have never been detected and there's no evidence of incidental take happening in those areas. And so it was not thought that it would here either. The fence is also not right around, you know, it will be off the pond by a ways. John's Craig.
Sure. Yeah, let me just chime in there right quick. So in Appendix A, we deal with some of the avoidance and minimization measures for Hawaiian hoary bat. So they were considered pretty specifically. They do include, we're not going to be using barbed wire on the ungulate fence. That's a pretty standard protocol to avoid them getting hung up. As we all know, they kind of tumble when they forage and they lose a little bit of situational awareness as they're going through the air. We also, as a standard company policy, have a policy not to clear trees over 15 feet during the pupping season. And so clearing the fence line where there are trees that are over 15 feet is going to occur. And we'll do that outside of the pupping season to avoid any take there as well. And then we had some pretty extensive conversations with, in particular, Diane Sether, who bats are near and dear to her heart in terms of avoidance and minimization. And the construction of the fence and the vegetation line is such that it shouldn't be in the middle of a foraging corridor where those bats could be impacted. So all of those things are already in place and are in the document. I do think also that for the size of the water features that we're talking about, at this point, we don't think it's going to increase the local insect population to the degree that it would unduly attract bats to that area. And even if the bats are attracted, it should be a relatively safe habitat for them. So hopefully that addresses some of your questions and concerns about bats at the site.
I guess it does. I was just curious why it, you know, you have the stilts and the bees. I just was wondering, you know, it's great. There's those minimization documentation there, but yeah, so many of the projects we're working on with bats talk about water features of any size. So just was curious why it wasn't added as a species as well.
Yeah, and I think it's because I don't think there's any anticipated, there aren't any likely mechanisms of take associated with the action that pointed towards including them.
So question for Will or the applicant. So given the diversity of native damselflies, are there any others on Lānaʻi? I guess I'm wondering, trying to get a picture of the whole diversity of damselflies, dragonflies existing on Lānaʻi now that you need to be thinking about.
Yeah, so there are several other native damselflies on Lānaʻi. There are no other listed species on Lānaʻi. And then as far as dragonflies, there are a couple native dragonflies that are going to be widespread on Lānaʻi. And then I think there are about 4 non-native dragonflies that are widespread. I mean, they're widespread in Hawaii in general. So yeah, we will likely see dragonflies using the site. I mean, they're very good dispersers and they're going to find the site. The other native damselflies are probably not likely to use this type of habitat just because they're more stream adapted. And so they're going to be up, you know, in the gullies and in the higher elevations.
Okay, thanks. So for the non-native dragonflies, are those known predators of damselflies at any life stage?
As naiads, so like as immatures, they will prey on the naiads. Yeah. Just for context too, one female damselfly in one sitting can lay about over 500 eggs. So they're very fecund and they're producing a lot of offspring. So most of those offspring will get eaten by something, either each other or other predators. So we can't completely avoid predation, but you know we're going to try to minimize predation by these non-native dragonflies. But it's not something that we can totally eliminate. I don't know. Does that help?
No, that's very helpful. Thank you, because my knowledge about damselflies is extremely limited. So that's very helpful. Thanks, Will. So with monitoring, we're going to be seeing whether or not we're building a sustainable population, but I'm just wondering, that's kind of why I wanted to look at the mitigation table, which I'm just wondering if it's not working out, if there's going to be things like at least opportunistic control of non-native dragonflies, which are known predators and that kind of thing. So maybe could we look at the table to see what kind of mitigation you folks are thinking?
Yes.
Is the expectation that the control of the non-native dragonflies would be pretty short term, like that once the orange-black damselfly population was established, that it wouldn't be necessary? Is that the premise?
Yeah, I'm just, if we try and establish a population and it's just not working out like expected, and this is why we have mitigation plans in place, and I'm just wondering, seems like if that's not working out, then, and if non-native dragonflies are non-predator, then they should be included in their control, should be included in some kind of mitigation, or I mean, sorry, adaptation.
Yeah, I was about to say, Kavika, like just the wording is important here where this isn't mitigation, but adaptive management should always apply.
I'm sorry,
And
that was the term I was aspiring for. Sorry about that.
Yep.
Is somebody going to walk us through this, or are we just reading?
I can walk through parts of it if you'd like. I think in particular, the second row on the top, from the top, is talking about orange-black Hawaiian damselflies, and if there is the indicator being abundance, if there are fewer than 3 adult damselflies observed on each of 3 consecutive surveys, which are initially happening weekly, then again, in talking with Will and the Megalagrion working group, they said there are so many reasons why that could be that it was hard to define specific responses at this point, but that there would be evaluation of the reasons for that decreased abundance given the current conditions at the time, and the Megalagrion working group would be the source of suggestions for potential responses of adaptive management at that point.
I have a quick question. Do you folks anticipate, or maybe this is for the invertebrate folks, do the water birds contribute to predation as well for the damselfly? Is there any concern there?
This is Will. They are likely going to eat some of the damselflies, but they have never been identified as a threat to this species, as far as having significant impacts on their populations. So I think that's pretty doubtful that they'd be eating enough of them or targeting them, enough to have a significant impact.
And would you
would you be able to monitor that, I guess? Would you be able to know if that was a significant impact from your monitoring, or not really?
I wouldn't be able to, from just monitoring damselfly populations weekly, be able to say like, oh, you know, we're not specifically sitting there. We're not proposing to observe water bird predation. I don't know if Rachel has any comments on that, but yeah, I don't think we would necessarily be able to detect it.
Yeah, from talking with other folks who watch a lot of damselflies and water birds, such as Arleon on Molokai, she says yes, that Hawaiian stilts will chow down on damselflies, and there will be thousands of damselflies all at the same time.
So I guess I don't know what happened in the table.
Here.
So I think what I'm hearing, and please correct me if I'm misunderstanding, is all expectations are that a reintroduction will be successful, but if it looks like it's not successful, then you folks will just defer to the working group. So kind of what I saw on the table, but disappeared.
All right. I know.
I don't know. It just seems like there should be a little bit more fleshed out. That doesn't seem like much of an adaptation plan, if I'm understanding it correctly.
Well, I think at some point we want to do everything we can to facilitate the introduction and persistence of damselflies there. I think at some point, if the experts, the invertebrate experts, can't come up with a reason why they're not doing well, then there's a possibility that the population of damselflies might not take, or it might not persist for the term of the agreement. And I mean, yeah, I think at some point we would no longer have assurances, but we would not need them because there would not be damselflies there. I think for a conservation action, I think you're picking up that this is a little bit of a proof of concept, that based on captive rearing and based on observations of the existing populations, that the damselfly folks will and the team that's really thinking about the recovery, they think this has a really good chance of working, and they have been able to successfully manage damselflies persisting in managed ponds and pools in sort of a captive setting, and this is sort of that next step out.
Okay.
I don't want to.
I think I understand. And I guess what I'm trying to understand from my end as an ESRC member is I don't think this is a level of adaptive management that we would be okay with in an HCP, but being that this is a safe harbor, are we okay with being more lenient or more vague in our adaptive management? And that's a completely open question to ESRC members and DLNR.
So it is a complicated question, Kavika, at least on our end. This isn't a habitat conservation plan, and the way in which we look at adaptive management is different. I think it's probably, in my mind, more akin to a DOFA or Fish and Wildlife Service funded or conducted recovery action. When I think about there's two different components here, right? The the safe harbor agreement is creating the human managed habitat that allows for the conditions to reintroduce Megalagrion. There is a separate but concurrent action for DOFA to reintroduce the species, and the two have to work hand in hand. In this case, the applicant is not proposing to reintroduce the species, they're proposing to create the habitat that will allow for the species to be introduced. I think the challenge that we're facing here is that you're right, this adaptive management strategy is not as robust as we would normally see in an HCP, nor is it necessarily as robust as we would like to see for a true reintroduction plan. But that's because DOFA is leading the reintroduction effort in accordance with their permits rather than the applicant doing so as part of their safe harbor agreement permit request. I would turn to DOFA though. Is that how you see it as well? Is that how you're looking at the components of these two concurrent actions?
Yeah, I'm thinking about other safe harbor agreements that we have had where it is the same situation, right? Where the state is introducing Nene to a private land and the landowners basically allowing that to happen on their land, and we're doing a lot of the conservation measures to introduce the species. But I feel like in those, we did have kind of targets that we thought about in terms of what we expect that net benefit to be for the species was laid out in terms of we expect the population to reach a certain level or something like that. I don't know if we have that in this, but you know, it is, I feel like this is like a recovery effort that DOFA is trying to do on private lands, and we have an agreement to use those lands, and we want to provide assurances to that landowner that they don't have liability for the endangered species on their property. If we want to tighten up some of these adaptive managements, I don't see any harm in that as a group. And you know, if Kavika, if you're looking for examples like of what those adaptive management actions might be, I think the invertebrate group already knows what those might be. And if we want to include that, I don't see any reason not to.
That'd make me feel better. And
I
then
mean, at least what I heard though is that there is a good faith effort here from the landowner to say if this metric isn't met, this metric on the second line here of this table, then there is a good faith effort to work with the Megalagrion working group to identify what those actions are, to address them, and to continue the effort to reintroduce the species. So, you know, maybe there's something in there that we can do to clarify that role and responsiveness between the landowner and the Megalagrion working group. But it sounds like a lot of the adaptive management for some of this is going to be driven by the recommendations of the Megalagrion working group based on real-time information.
I can appreciate that. What I'm also hearing is that there might be some general recommendations, which would be good. I'm just looking for a level of consistency in how we operate as ESRC, and I'm not really comfortable with such vague adaptive management in really anything, especially when there's already some plans in place that just weren't incorporated yet for whatever reason. So let's just be consistent, folks, please.
If it helps, it really did start as literally a recovery action of just us talking with Will and Cynthia about could we create ponds and under their permits and try establishing a population. It's turned into already what's a fairly large and like 4-year process of a safe harbor agreement, when we thought it was maybe going to be like 6 months of planning a site and just doing it in order to provide those additional assurances. Even though the probability again of damselflies getting to such a large population that they are making it all over the island is unlikely. But I think if there are specific, we can go back and talk with Will about what options there might be.
Yeah, thank you. I'm just hoping for a little bit more consistency, and in that vein, Afshin or somebody, you mentioned that this is DOFA leading something on private lands. Are there other example of safe harbor agreements where DOFA has been trying to push for something on private lands?
Yeah, so we have a few, the Nene Safe Harbor agreements where we've introduced Nene to Pu'uhoku Ranch on Molokai. That was a safe harbor agreement. Pi'i Holo was a safe harbor agreement where we introduced Nene there, and Haleakala Ranch. Those three were where really the action of the recovery of the species was conducted by the state. So the safe harbor agreement just provides that assurance to the landowner that they don't have, future restrictions, because we have, it's confined to whatever those covered activities are for incidental take and all of that, but it's to provide that incentive for private lands to provide land for recovery of endangered species.
Yeah, so I guess I'm just wondering if in these instances, the adaptive management is more a burden of DOFA than the landowner, or it seems like maybe that should be articulated, or is that not useful?
Yeah, I think that would, so I would defer to the invertebrate group, but I believe all those adaptive management actions would be implemented by DOFA, but I don't want to say wrong if that isn't correct.
Well, can I ask it this way? And maybe this goes to Will. My assumption is that as there is greater plans for what that reintroduction attempt is actually going to look like, there will be some sort of document produced that addresses the questions of like which genetic stock are being used and what the game plan is, and presumably what that adaptive management components would look like. Is that a correct assumption on my part?
In the past, we haven't necessarily produced a document that outlines, our reintroduction plans. It's usually a proposal to the Megalagrion working group. So our recovery permit allows us to reintroduce this species to natural sites, or it can be artificial sites as well, but it allows us to reintroduce the species to sites as long as those sites are approved by the Megalagrion working group. So we have to present it to the group and get their sign off on new sites.
And then, forgive me for my ignorance, under that recovery permit, is there already sort of those general adaptive management provisions or specific things as part of that are already inherent in that recovery permit? I'm sorry for not knowing.
No, not really. So yeah, they allow us to attempt reintroduction, but if it does not take, there's no requirement for us to, try to make it take, I guess. They give us the flexibility for trying. It's primarily these natural sites where we identify sites that we think are suitable to reintroduce a species, but I guess we're not required to try to make a round peg fit a square hole, if it's just not going to take. So yeah,
I guess my bigger point here is just that it seems like at the moment the applicant here, Pūlama Lānaʻi, is proposing to create the site, but it seems like DOFA is the ones that are implementing the reintroduction. So to me, that changes the way in which we would address like some of this detail and nuance around adaptive management needs to be figured out as to where that occurs. It does need to occur. It is our expectation that adaptive management is an inherent part of a well-developed and implemented recovery action like this. The question is, where does that live?
Okay. Yeah, I guess when we were putting this together, I think it was just really difficult to predict you know, all the reasons why a reintroduction effort might not take or might, you know, be struggling. And so, yeah, we weren't, I mean, we worked with Fish and Wildlife on developing these adaptive management indicators, and yeah, this was kind of what we as a group came up with, but yeah,
Okay.
I guess I don't really know. I mean, yeah,
It's
I'm more
okay.
of, I just raised the bugs, so this is kind of out of my wheelhouse as far as like the regulatory stuff. But yeah, I guess this is something that we need to reconvene about.
Karen, I see your hand.
Yeah, I guess this sort of follows on those, or I guess in looking at these like adaptive management actions, you know, so, you know, it looks like, you know, like there's a water quality one where it's like implementing, you know, sediment removal or things like that. Who does that fall in this type of arrangement? Who does the responsibility fall to for implementing these types of adaptive management? Like, and where does the funding come from to do those?
In terms of maintenance of the area, it would fall to us.
So like you know, one of these actions that would be like maintaining the ponds would fall to Pūlama Lānaʻi to implement.
Yeah.
Rachel, is it correct for us to assume that anything that is proposed in the safe harbor agreement is being undertaken by the landowner?
Yes, unless it says specifically
Right.
dealing.
Okay.
Okay. Thanks. That's helpful.
And I think we were approaching it also as thinking about that adaptive management of like, if we didn't want damselflies, we wouldn't be proposing this to start with. And so we have a vested interest in having it be successful. And, you know, if it fails the first time, this isn't a mitigation action for an HCP that we have to do to offset something. And so we need to be, I don't want to say strong-armed into trying it again. We would have created this, and, you know, from private funding to try to create habitat for them. And if it doesn't work, we have an interest in working with the Megalagrion working group to try to make it work. We're not going to invest a ton of money in a restoration site, and if it doesn't work the first time, be like, well, sorry guys, that was fun. We don't have to try it again, so we're not going to try it again. I think we were all in when I'm thinking about talking with Will and with Diane. I think we approached this from an assumption of a good faith effort on all parts, that this is a proactive action that we're all taking to try to make it work, and that our incentive is to not do the bare minimum. Our incentive is to make it work. And so I think that's where some of this difference in the adaptive management is coming from in comparison with the HCPs that I know that you all look at most of the time.
I gotta thank you for that, Rachel, because I think these kinds of tools, safe harbors agreements, are really important for Fish and Wildlife Service and the state to incentivize private landowners to do actions on their lands. And also, just over the course of my conservation career, seeing that, you know, an effort like this is going towards an invertebrate is a big deal. And so I think knowing that, you know, it would be really wonderful if this works, and then can be kind of used as a template for other sites as well. So I just, you know, I think it was a fun project to be able to read and be a part of, to review. So I just commend that this project is moving forward in a collaborative way.
Thank you.
So, just another clarifying question. So there's 4 things in this table. So the only one that's DOFA driven is the damselfly, whereas the Haleʻula and the Ai'o and the Nālameli are already existing on the island and are presumed would take advantage of this habitat. Am I understanding that correctly?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, so in that regard, and kind of in line with what Lisa's talking about, to be encouraging of landowners to be engaging in conservation, it seems like the DOFA driven action should be kind of called out a little bit more as something that we're gonna not be more lenient on, but be more flexible with the landowner, whereas the other actions, I think, from my opinion, would be from the ESRC, as a ESRC member, as those would be a little, I would expect a little bit more stringency, but happy to hear others' opinions on that.
Well, it's so this action, the applications before us right now, is the applicant's request, the applicant's action. That's different than DOFA's action. We're not evaluating DOFA's action. DOFA's action is defined by DOFA's plans and their recovery permit with the Fish and Wildlife Service and their work that they have through their own auspices of 195D, right? That's not part, it's a concurrent action, but it's not coming to this committee to evaluate.
Wait, so now I'm confused. So we're not evaluating the safe harbor agreement for Ai'o and Alai'ula and Nālameli at the same time?
Sorry, we're considering everything within this application, but not DOFA's actions.
I understand that, but I'm just saying.
Okay.
So when just within this table, if you look at the response column, seems like because Damselfly is a DOFA driven initiative, that there should be some calling out that the responses are a larger burden on DOFA than it is the landowner, whereas these other ones are completely, like the Ai'o and the Alai'ula, the burden of those responses would be the sole responsibility of the applicant. Am I misunderstanding
Got it.
that?
Sorry. No, my fault. I was misunderstanding you, Kavika. Sorry.
Does that seem reasonable, or am I off? Members.
Yeah, I guess. I just want to clarify with DOFA staff or invertebrate folks. Because my understanding when I look at the agreement is that, yes, we're taking the lead on the reintroduction of the damselflies. Lānaʻi is maintaining the site where they're going to be introduced. But I'm assuming we're also taking the lead for some of these adaptive management actions. But I want to make sure that's yes or no. I want to make sure I'm not misunderstanding that.
I think that the actual adaptive management actions would also be on Pūlama. Correct me if I'm wrong, Rachel. But on page 31 of the conservation benefit agreement, that outlines the responsibilities of the LNR. So that is just the reintroduction, the actions involved with actually translocating the damselfly to Lāna'i and providing technical assistance. But as far as carrying out the actions, I think as far as the agreement is concerned, that would fall on Pūlama. Is that correct, Rachel?
Yeah, that's my understanding. Is that we'd be relying on you to help interpret and, for instance, in particular, to help interpret issues with the population of Orangeblack Hawaiian damselflies that are in those pools. And for that abundance response, we might still be the one making a change to water quality, or putting up a screen or something, with that assistance from the Megalagrion working group, which is the Fish and Wildlife Service and DLNR and some other species experts. And I guess to potentially, to Kavika's point, I think we would take all of the responses seriously, and I think the minimization and avoidance for Hawaiian stilt and Hawaiian coot and Assimila's yellow-faced bees are pretty extensive, and those species are included because we don't expect there to be hundreds of them at this site, and even for Hawaiian stilt and Hawaiian coot, we started off thinking of a take request of 1 over 50 years because we don't expect to take those individuals. I think in conversations we were discussed that 50 years is a long time, and it's possible that that 3 of each would be more recommended. But again, the actions are targeted at damselflies, and again, and are may provide some benefits to Hawaiian stilt and coot and Assimila's yellow-faced bees. But I don't see most of the actions having a negative impact on those species. John, did you want to add anything else?
Well, I mean, I was just going to say, so for stilt, coot, and bees, I feel like within the document, we identified all of the plausible sources of take and avoidance and minimization to avoid that occurring. And this number of 3 animals over the course of 50 years is where that incidental take comes from. We as a group weren't able to identify any other sort of plausible sources of take, but it seemed appropriate to include it in the adaptive management response table, just in case that were to occur. What's interesting is if you sort of look at the response to the adaptive management for unanticipated take, is to cease activities, which is the language in the take license, right? Is if take occurs by some action that was unanticipated, that action just stops. And there's then a conversation between DOFA and Fish and Wildlife Service to either just cease doing the activity or find a way to minimize or avoid or otherwise account for that kind of take. So I'd say within the body of the document, any plausible sources of take for those species have been identified and contingency made therein. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does to me. Started to think about cats. You couldn't really cease an activity relating to a cat getting in the area and taking a bird. So how is that treated?
So if a bird were taken by a cat, that wouldn't be considered take because that's not an action of the landowner. If a bird were caught in a cat trap because we were doing predator control, that would be considered take. So the take is really designed to accommodate for the positive management action of predator control in the site. So, for instance, those 3 birds includes the possibility that a bird could encounter a trap, get trapped, and there's monitoring in place to release that animal as quickly as possible to avoid any sort of lethal take, but obviously it would still be considered take under the terms of the license. And again, if I'm dipping into my former service hat, so feel free to chime in, Fish and DOFA, if I overstate.
So I just want to be sure I understand what you just said. So if there's a predation take by a cat in an artificial pond, you're saying that's not the landowner's responsibility?
I don't believe it is. I'll look to DOFA and Fish and Wildlife to see their opinion on that.
It's not take, right? But it is the landowner's responsibility in the sense of ideally that they're taking active steps to try and remove cats and keep cats out of a site where we are actively trying to promote the conservation and recovery of listed species.
I could provide a concrete example on Lānaʻi. So currently we have a recovery permit to do work on Ua'u up on the Hale, and that includes a large number of cat traps and A24 rat traps. Those traps have both been very successful at increasing the success of birds in the colony. But there are still some number of cats and some number of rats that avoid the trapping grid and contribute to mortality within the colony area. Per the terms of that recovery permit, mortality caused by a cat is not considered take, but if we capture an uau in one of our cat traps, or this year to be, I mean, it was a really odd circumstance, we had a mortality caused by an A24, that would be considered take under the terms of that recovery permit that needs to be accounted for within that document. So we are proposing to do the same thing at this site. We are proposing to do cat trapping and predator management inside of the conservation area to protect stilt coot that could arrive or be attracted to that site. And we are asking for take assurances if in the course of doing that predator management, we have take of one of those species.
Okay, I think that's helpful. And part of what I'm thinking is one of the HCPs we have on Kauai at like a resort kind of place where the people were feeding cats and the cats were taking the birds. To me, that is the landowner's responsibility. So, and you know, in the pictures you folks showed, it seemed like a lot of these ponds were close to the resort area. And so if workers are maintaining cat colonies in proximity to these ponds, I would think that's the owner's responsibility.
I think this is where the site visit's going to be really helpful, Kavika. Pūlama Lānaʻi has been on kind of the cutting edge of trying to find effective means of getting cats off the landscape and doing it with community buy-in. And while it's not perfect, right, there is still predation happening on Lānaʻi, they have been incredibly successful at doing large-scale landscape level cat control in a means that I'm going to be careful with my words here, that supports the conservation and recovery of a multitude of listed species.
Okay. Yes. So I look forward to that. I was kind of asking a philosophical question.
Of is it the landowner's responsibility?
Cat take is not the landowner's responsibility, but in the instance where the owner's staff are maintaining cat colonies, and I'm not saying that's happening on Lānaʻi, it's a philosophical question, legal question, and maybe the AG should weigh in, but if a private landowner's paid staff is maintaining a cat colony next to a conservation project and those cats are taking protected birds, is that not the landowner's responsibility?
That is a legal question, and it's an ongoing discussion with our solicitor's office and the state AG about how much we can hold landowners responsible for that. But certainly within our HCPs, that is why we have language that says you cannot be promoting cats on lands that are also there for conservation and recovery of species.
Is
So
that same language in this safe harbor agreement?
not promoting cats in these areas.
Whatever the language was that you said is in HCPs, is there a reason why that wouldn't be cut and paste into this safe harbor agreement?
Well, in this case, the language that's in the safe, Rachel, John, correct me if I'm wrong, but the language here is that you're actively doing cat control, right?
Correct. Yep,
Okay.
it would be immediately around the site, as well as there's 2 lines from the larger landscape cat grid that go close. And I guess there is not specific language prohibiting cat feeding, but I think it was based on the baseline that there is not cat colony feeding and there's active cat removal.
Okay, could you point us to a page number, please?
One thing also just want to clarify that the water bird coverage and I guess the yellow face V2 maybe is only in that conservation area, it's not in all of the land, right? So whatever measures are in place for those species would be specific to that smaller area.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah, so the page was put into the document, but just to read it right quick, section 11, subsection 1, predator control. Pūlama Lānaʻi will trap and remove predators, including feral cats. So in this case, there is not a prohibition on feeding. We are actually staking a claim to actively removing.
Is there any reason why we just wouldn't insert that? So it's not okay to maintain them, plus we're gonna be controlling them? Just for consistency with across our other documents?
In this,
Objections from the applicant?
so in this case, the only take of stilts or coots is being requested is in association with actions that are being taken at the conservation area. And so it doesn't address just anything related to stilts or coots on the entire island. There's not, because there was not a nexus for.
No, yeah, so I'm sorry, I understand that. I am just looking again for consistency across all of the documents that we are advising on. And what I'm saying is if there are statements, it's kind of boilerplate in HCPs that within this area, there will be no, maintenance of a cat colony or whatever the language was, that just be cut and paste into across all these documents. So it's nice and consistent and we don't have to really think about it every time. Is there any reason why that we wouldn't be consistent like that?
I think from the landowner side, we can look at including a bullet point under predator control that says that we will not actively attract. We can talk about what that language would look like. If there's some boilerplate that would make the ESRC more comfortable, I don't see it being too much of a problem to add to that section.
Yeah, thank you. And this is not against the applicant. This is just me trying to get all of our things to be consistent because they've historically been all over the place and it's been really hard for us to track. So,
One more thing, the adaptive management triggers are not just regarding take, right? So the adaptive management triggers for damselfly is also about ensuring, that this plan to reintroduce damselfly to the area is going to work, right? So that's why you have, if for some reason there's a decrease in the abundance, then you're going to talk to the working group. I just want to make sure Kavika, his comments are addressed, because it wasn't just for the take, it was also for the recovery potential of the species. So are you still, I guess I'm asking Kavika, are you okay with just leaving it as with assistance with the Megalagrion? Sorry, working group, or you want to see something more?
Are we voting on this today or are we just making recommendations? I think I would appreciate, I don't know if we should go into executive session to do this, but just some discussion amongst ERC members. I'm fine to do this in public, but I would like to hear from other ESRC members about how they're feeling about my point.
I can certainly appreciate trying to have consistency among, various documents that we're reviewing and holding, I guess, maintaining sort of these like minimum standards for what, what agreements look like. And so, even though it seems like in this case, it's certainly the intention of the, Pūlama Lānaʻi to not maintain a cat colony. It seems like having that as part of the agreement, like there is in a lot of the others, is for a matter of consistency makes sense. So yeah, that it's not a question, it doesn't come up as a question later that, there is that needs, we don't need to clarify later.
Okay, and then what about the first part about the damselfly adaptive management. Is the vague language, I guess the open question to ESRC is the vague language in the adaptive management for the damselfly, are we okay with that? Because it's a DOFA driven initiative and not something else, or, and again, consistency across how we're treating our expectations for adaptive management in HCPs and safe harbors and those kinds of things. So I'm happy to hear anybody's perspective on that.
So I do think this is different, right? Like this is a applicant driven collaborative recovery project that they have no obligation to do. They are coming to us saying, we want to do something to support Megalagrion and to create the conditions that allow for Megalagrion to be reintroduced to Lāna'i. DOFA is responsible for doing the reintroduction. The applicant here is just trying to create a site that allows for that to happen. It is different to me than it is for a lot of the ways in which we look at the other projects that comes before this committee. And I just want us to all be clear on that. They have no obligation to be here. So while I do think that adaptive management is an incredibly important component of any recovery action, I want to make sure that we're thinking about this from the perspective of the applicant is proposing something. It is on us to evaluate what it is that they're proposing. They are not proposing to do the actual reintroduction. That's a DOFA action.
Right, but the adaptive management in the future, now that I understand this correctly, is not a DOFA action. It would be a Pūlama Lānaʻi action. So if the goal is to provide that net benefit to these damselflies that we're reintroducing, and then we're gonna have adaptive management in place to make sure that those goals, of recovery for these species are hopefully going to be met through these actions, then it is Pūlama Lānaʻi that is implementing those adaptive management actions in the future, right? So that's not a DOFA action. That's my understanding now.
I think they're handing, well, I don't know, correct me if I'm wrong, but John and Rachel, my understanding is that you're basically handing some of that decision-making power about specific things that could be done to the Megalagrion working group.
So to the specific,
for them.
Oh, sorry.
Okay. So site management, adaptive management falls within the proposed action here. But some of those things about other reasons as to why a population wouldn't get established is heading to Megalagrion working group.
I think what's fair to say is Pūlama Lānaʻi is taking on responsibility for implementation, right? So to be specific about the language, we are going to implement adaptive management actions as is deemed appropriate in conversation with the Megalagrion working group. But we are absolutely deferring to that group to guide that process. So, this document enumerates the implementation criterion as best as we can to have the highest chance for success. But yes, we are deferring a lot of the decision making because we do not have the on-island experience, nor are we really qualified to unilaterally make these decisions from an adaptive perspective going forward. But yes, the implementation is ours. The guidance, we're putting gas in the bus, but the bus is getting driven by the Megalagrion working group, if that makes sense.
Which is getting back to that collaborative, like we participate in the Megalagrion working group in other areas. So it's the idea, I think, is to put the decisions around the specific adaptive management back to that collaborative partnership between the state Fish and Wildlife Service and us.
So for Pūlama Lānaʻi, then my question would be, do you want sidebars on that? I don't know. It's kind of open-ended, right? Like what the working group would suggest for you to do. Are you comfortable with that?
Yeah, that's part of my concern too, is I think we want to make a friendly environment for private landowners to be engaging in conservation. But if they're driving the bus and they say, oh, well, these ponds need to actually be 20 acres, then that doesn't bode well for the landowner.
So this has been a big topic of conversation as we've, brought this document together. There are provisions within the document that if we have, as a landowner, feel that the adaptive management or the conditions that the Megalagrion group is requiring for the project to be successful are either too onerous or too expensive or outside of the reasonable capacity of the landowner to accommodate, that we can, as a landowner, withdraw from the agreement. So from our standpoint, we are perfectly comfortable in taking on any reasonable, fundable, tractable, adaptive management that we as a landowner can accommodate. And if it goes beyond that, we'll have that conversation. But at this point, I think we have a relationship of trust and understanding of what we're trying to accommodate, that we don't see that as being a near-term issue.
Yeah, well, so that's great to hear, because I do want to be sure that we're creating policies that make it conducive for large landowners to be engaging in conservation. So just a question, is that language, did you folks come up with that on your own in this process, or is that kind of boilerplate from other safe harbors that we can also share as we're in discussion with large landowners in our other lives?
I'm going to defer. I don't recall what proportion was boilerplate and what proportion was modified in our conversations. Rach, do you want to chime in on that?
I don't know. I mean, as anything that's in the document, once it's in there, even if we modified it for the purposes of this document, I think are available for anyone else in the future who would like to.
No, I was just curious if that came from, oh, there's another safe harbor agreement that we have this amazing language. We're just going to cut and paste that and put that in this one too. Is that the way it went down, or did you folks come up with something? I'm just curious. It doesn't really matter.
Actually, so in large part, a lot of the language did come from the service. So the service, and credit where credit's due, Diane and some folks behind the scenes, Terry, really did a lot of work helping put that language together. And that was drawn from some previous safe harbor agreements on the mainland as well. So a lot of pre-existing language was brought in with some significant assistance, both from the service and DLNR, that we then tweaked on our end just to make sure that we were comfortable with how it turned out. But yes, there was a lot of pre-existing material that was folded in.
Okay, thank you.
One more topic I wanted to bring up, which was, and might be a question for Fish and Wildlife Service, but in this agreement, there's a reference to quote unquote purposeful take authorized, and I don't really, and I know there's nothing in, or at least that I've seen, that has purposeful take occurring with the conservation actions and everything that's happening. And I'm just wondering, because I am thinking for the state side, I don't see how we can allow under a safe harbor agreement purposeful take. It would be always incidental take that we're authorizing and not purposeful take. And so is there a reason we have purposeful take written in the document? Is there any way we can remove that, since I don't think there's any intent for purposeful take within this agreement?
I'm sorry, Afshin, can you point me to the reference on that? This was for capturing and relocating individuals.
It's Michelle, if you look at page 1 and page 2, so in introductions, section 1.1 and
Okay.
1.3, the second paragraph of 1.1 includes the language purposeful, and then 1.3 at the bottom of that paragraph.
Got it. Okay.
Michelle, may I speak to this while you're reviewing the document?
Sure. And I'm also, Terry, Terry Frederick on my team has given me some context here too. Please go ahead, Lisa.
So first of all, everybody, I'm Lisa Bale. I'm representing Pūlama Lānaʻi, and Afshin, this language about purposeful take came from your deputy AG. So I'd suggest maybe you want to have an executive session and talk with her. I don't know if she's there in the room with you.
Oh, okay. Well, I didn't know that.
I think it was related to the, well, I'm not the lawyer. I think it was related to the parts of it that if damselflies were found, we would potentially be capturing and relocating them, like from other areas to the conservation area, or from one pond to another if we were needing to like remove vegetation. That would be purposeful, like we would be moving it with naiads to a container while we did maintenance around one of the ponds. But I think I will completely defer to Danica.
And it sounds like this was also done in coordination with the service solicitor, and that purposeful take associated with implementation of the recovery action is allowable under the revised CFRs for the Fish and Wildlife Service regs. So this is intended to be as part of the value of the safe harbor agreement, right? These are conservation actions that would be done.
Right, I get that, and that's why I guess the word purposeful is what I'm concerned about, just because I don't think under, and again, I refer to Danica on this because I'm not the lawyer either, but under 195D, I don't think we have an allowance for purposeful take.
Maybe check in with her then, Afshin, because if yeah, maybe check in there.
Want to go to the executive session?
So Danica's, is she in the room or is she just on Zoom?
I see her on Zoom.
Yeah, I might request an executive session because I'm just thinking about our kind of sliding scale of stringency on adaptive management, and I'm trying to make sure that we're making the right recommendations in regards to things in the law. Would that be possible?
I think we're trying to get a hold of her. I think she's on the Zoom. Maybe she walked away.
You came through garbled, Afshin. Do you mind repeating?
I think we're trying to get a hold of Danica. I know she's on the Zoom, but we haven't been able to get a response. So maybe she's walked away for a few minutes.
Okay. Well, I would appreciate an executive session to discuss that and this the language that we were just talking about, purposeful take, to get their perspective. We can continue until we hear back from her. Can we go into executive session without her?
I don't think so. But I do have a question. Is the definition of purposeful take the same between the Fed and the state endangered species law? Because
I don't know the answer to that. I do know that in past actions we have kind of so I'm going to speak from the service for a second.
Thank you.
So for Fish and Wildlife Service, under our previous CFRs, under our previous regulations, we were not allowed to allow for purposeful take. But there was all these actions that are inherently part of the conservation action that, you know, depending on what definition you use, gets really complicated. Is it purposeful or is it not purposeful? And things like monitoring the listed species that you're actively doing work to conserve and recover sometimes can result in take, right? Like take at the level of harassment, not mortality, right? But you still have to capture that somewhere. And so the new Fish and Wildlife Service regs fix that by creating better language around it and allow for all of that to be included. But previously, one of the things that we would say is that, you know, those types of actions are, they are part and parcel with the recovery action, right? So they're not purposeful take, but they are incidental to the proposed action, which is to conserve and recover the species. How that works under 195D, I honestly don't know, but that is where the lawyers come into play.
And here's our lawyer on cue.
Hi all, sorry, I had been pulled away for something else, but I'm back now. What is the question? I might need a minute to answer, but what's going on?
Well, I called for executive session.
Okay, great, I'll see you in there.
Do we need to vote on that or we just go?
Yeah, might as well vote on it. The Board of Land and Natural Resources votes on it, so I would recommend that you also vote on it.
Okay, so as expressed earlier, I'd like to go into executive session to discuss or how we're assessing adaptive management across all of our HCPs and safe harbor agreements, as well as to talk about the language about purposeful take that's in this safe harbor agreement.
Okay.
That's my motion. Is there a second?
I'll second it, sure. And
Aye.
then we have to vote, yeah.
We do. I mean, I guess I'm curious as to why this discussion can't happen in the open.
I don't know. Well, Lisa's the one who suggested it. So, and I don't know, it just seems like when we get our legal counsel, that's the appropriate time to go into executive session. Is that not right?
Yeah, if you have legal questions, I prefer to answer your legal questions in executive session and not on the record, for the public record.
Okay.
Okay, so do we want to vote on going into executive session? Those in favor, I guess, if you put your hand up.
I don't.
Okay, I see everyone's hand raised, so we'll pause and go into executive session.
So do we have a different site for this, just to double check? It's in the
Lisa, it's a Teams link that was sent out. Yeah.
For everyone else on Zoom, you can stay on Zoom and we'll be back shortly. We're gonna go ahead and post a placeholder that says we're in executive session while we are
Can you make sure it's muted?
muted. Okay.
I don't know.
What are you trying to do?
Just from the share screen.
Okay, mine's muted, so you're good. Yeah.
This screen to be muted because she's checking.
Hello, everyone. We are just gonna let's concern ourselves. Gonna try this one more time. Okay, we are waiting for everyone to return. Does anyone need an additional 5-minute break? Okay, we're waiting for Afshin to return, and we will be with you all shortly.
Sorry, who's speaking?
Hi, Kavika. This is Kinsley. I will
Oh,
turn on.
Kinsley, okay.
I was just seeing if anyone else wanted a break. Afshin ran to the restroom. If anyone else wanted a break for a couple minutes to.
I'm good.
Okay. Yeah.
All right, sorry. Okay, I think we have everyone back on. We're gonna hand it over to you, Lisa.
Okay, mahalo. So I'm just gonna kind of make some comments from our executive session that we are very appreciative that the Deputy AG from the state, Danica Swenson, was there to help us clarify. So we looked at the statute as it is 195, and we want to be sure that we continue to incentivize, private landowners to do collaborative conservation work. And given that review of the statute, we are, comfortable with the adaptive management as the way it's outlined. And we want to encourage DOFA to continue to work with the AG's office on developing the administrative rules for safe harbors and HCPs, because that'll really help provide guidance for both applicants and the ESRC moving forward into how to clarify, what is expected with adaptive management. So for this project in particular, as outlined, we're comfortable with the adaptive management as is. Did I state that clearly and correctly? And then moving on to the definition of purposeful take. Again, as related to this project specifically, purposeful take and incidental take are essentially viewed as the same thing. And DOFA, we encourage DOFA and the permittee to, as language goes into the incidental take permit, that, that is reflected in that permit specifically for this project. And encourage further conversation between the agencies to clarify purposeful take as it's defined by the on the federal side and on the state side. Any further clarification or questions about that?
I guess the only thing that I would add, Lisa, is that it was clear from our executive session conversation that the state AG and the Fish and Wildlife Service Solicitor's Office had reviewed this language and were okay with it as written.
Yeah.
Danica, is that okay for me to say?
Yes, yes.
Okay,
Both
thank
the
you.
solicitor and I worked with Ms. Bale on this, and particularly about the purposeful take, and had discussions about, what that means in the context of this agreement.
Thank you.
Okay, are there any other discussion items that the ESRC wants to bring up at this point on the agreement? Okay, I don't think I see anybody saying anything.
On YouTube, there's no comments, and via email, no comments. I would say we could open it back up on Zoom if there's any public.
Okay, so last opportunity for public comments in this meeting, I guess. No YouTube comments, no email comments. So if there's, and I don't know if there's anyone from the public that's joined this meeting, if they have any comments. Okay. Seeing none.
Afshin, I may just note here that the Fish and Wildlife Service had published the draft conservation benefit agreement, safe harbor agreement, and received one public comment back. That one public comment indicated, and it was an anonymous comment, but it said essentially, we appreciate efforts to do, I'm summarizing here, we appreciate efforts to do good things for Megalagrion and the Hawaiian weatherbirds and the bees. They are all wonderful species. Okay.
And then do we have, I guess, do you guys have something to share now?
I was just going to add that our public comment period on DOFA's side runs through January. It's a 60-day, so I think the deadline is January 21st. So if there's any public comments that want to go through the DOFA realm on the environmental review of this SHA, people can make comments through that as well. But other than that,
this is Danica again. Kinsley, do you also want to tell the public about what's going to the Board of Land and Natural Resources next week if this committee approves it, and the public hearing in January? So
Yes, yes. We spoke to the public hearing meeting earlier this morning during announcements. Oh, excuse me, I did not speak to the public. We spoke about the ESRC site visit, but the public hearing, thank you, Danica. That is an additional meeting that will be on January 17th at 6 p.m. at the Lāna'i Filipino Clubhouse. So that will be an opportunity, as Danica reminded us, that the public can also come in and testify or offer any comments regarding the SHA as well. So that will be publicized. We will promote that in, I believe, Lāna'i today. So stay tuned for that. And we'll try to get that on Maui News Now as well. Regarding board meeting next week, is that as well? We're going to be having an agenda item on the BLNR meeting next Friday. That's December 13th, I believe. Yes, 13th. And we are agenda, I think, C2 now. I need to double check that, but we're on the agenda, and it's regarding requests for the board to authorize a public hearing and to delegate to the chair to, I guess, set the time and place for the public hearing as well. So technically we have it reserved, but we will cancel it if we do not get that from the board and the chair as well. So
okay, thank you for saying that last part, Kinsley, because I was gonna add
tentatively
all of
reserved.
these other things like going to the board next week and the January 17th public meeting. Those are all contingent upon, you know, the recommendations that ESRC makes, and that no, it's not the board, just the board.
Not the public hearing. The public hearing is this, the board authorizes. Because
Yeah,
we're doing
so
it
the
on.
board still needs to authorize that, but if they do so authorize it, then, you know, it will be happening. But yeah, thank you, Kinsley. I just wanted to make sure the public was aware of any other further public funding for this project.
Thank you so much, Danica. If you want.
Okay. Okay, so I think the staff has a PowerPoint. They've been taking notes on whatever recommendations the ESRC has given so far. So I think they'll share that just to make sure everyone's on the same page. If committee members want to add anything or change any language that's on here. But this is just for the record, so.
I might have a comment about the genetic diversity of the founder species being used for this. So I think when species get this low in genetic diversity, I'm certainly on the philosophical side that we should be maximizing genetic diversity instead of trying to maintain a gene pool that's no longer evolutionarily competitive. And so I would strongly encourage the working group to consider trying to maximize the genetic diversity in the founding population on Lānaʻi to increase the highest likelihood of recovery of the species.
I think it might also be worth noting here that the ESRC deeply appreciates the landowner being willing to engage in this collaborative conservation effort and seek a safe harbor agreement that supports the conservation and recovery of Megalagrion on Lānaʻi. ESRC members any additions or edits to that recommendation, though.
That sounds good. Mahalo.
Anything else, committee members?
Nothing from me,
Let's
Shane. Thank you.
I don't have anything further.
Either mahalo.
Yeah, so thank you so much. Big appreciation for Pūlama and I to engage in conservation efforts. And hopefully we'll get an agreement sometime next year and we'll see damselflies on Lānaʻi. But the committee will see this back sometime next year for a recommendation for approval or not after all the public comment period's over, the public hearing, the site visit and all that. So we'll be hearing more about this in the near future. So thank you so much, Rachel, John.
Yeah.
Appreciate it.
Thank you very much for the presentation. That was really informative.
Mahalo.
Thanks, you all. Appreciate it.
I agree, which is adjournment. So I guess we need a motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn.
Second.
All right.
Aye.
Aye. All right. Thank you, everyone. Have a good Friday.
Thank you, Danica.
Same to you. Thanks all.
Thank you.